Hey travelers, welcome back to a new video. Travelers, if you aspire to be a management officer in the United States Foreign Service, this video is for you. We have the opportunity and privilege of hearing from Miss Geri Kam. She is a retired Foreign Service officer with over 30 years of experience in the management cone. In this video, she tells us what exactly is a management officer and her experiences as a management officer serving around the world from countries such as El Salvador, Mexico, Zimbabwe, just to name a few. Travelers, this is an interview you do not want to miss. But before we begin today's interview, be sure to hit that like button and smash the subscribe button for more content like this. And be sure to check out my free e-course where I talk about all things travel and careers in international affairs. The link is in the bio. All right, travelers, let's begin today's video. So first, what is a management officer?
A management officer is like the chief operating officer of an embassy or a portion of an embassy. So management officers do everything from hiring to budgets to real estate, property, leasing all the houses for the embassy staff, hiring and paying in local currency for all the local staff at an embassy. They do everything from shipping goods in and out of country, movement and exchange rate of money. So they do everything that keeps an embassy running that's not policy, but it's quite a lot.
What is your story? How did you wind up in the Foreign Service? What sparked you to join the Foreign Service?
You know, I joined on a whim. So I was pre-med and my major in college was physiology. And I thought, before I go to med school, I will, someone had mentioned that the State Department had these jobs and you took a test. So I took the test and I passed and they offered the job and I said, okay, I'll do this for a couple of years. I was working for Wall Street for a stock brokerage at the time. And I said, okay, I'll do that. Then I'll either go back to the brokerage or apply to med school. And I stayed in for 30 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So it was fun and it was exciting and challenging. And so it wasn't a planned, it was not a career goal. In fact, I never even really knew what State Department Foreign Service officers did. Yeah, it's been a fun ride.
What were the countries that you served in?
I did my first assignment in El Salvador. Then I was in Helsinki, Finland. Then I did a year in Bonn, Germany. And during that year, I was helping to open the new posts in the former Soviet Union. So I did a lot of travel to the Baltics, to Kiev, to Kazakhstan, and all the posts that in all the countries where we were beginning to establish relations after the fall of the Soviet Union. So I was in Bonn for a year doing that. Then I came to Washington I did a couple of assignments in Washington. Then I was in Mexico City for 3 years, then Jakarta, Indonesia for 3 years, and then back in Washington. We were in Bogota, Colombia, Lima, Peru, and then our most recent assignment was Harare, Zimbabwe.
So all over the world?
All over.
Did you have a favorite post?
I would probably say Indonesia. Mm-hmm. Although really, every post is special. Every post was amazing. My first post, El Salvador, was, everything was just wow. And so that was a lot of fun. Our most recent assignment in Zimbabwe was really just fantastic. The people, the wildlife, the scenery, the culture. But I would have to say Indonesia was very, very interesting. They have a very strong culture of arts, craft, textiles, furniture, food, and they have just gorgeous scenery. Bali was, always an attraction. All the temples. It was a lot of fun.
Did you ever think you would become a diplomat? I think you already kind of answered that.
No, never. I never had zero inkling of this at college. I'm from California, from Los Angeles, and stuff people do in Washington was really quite distant. Federal government activities were just sort of a distant idea. And so, no, I never, ever considered it.
How does someone become a Foreign Service officer?
It is a formal application process. There is an exam that is offered a couple times a year. It's a written exam, and it's offered both in the U.S. and overseas locations. And then there is also interview, or actually an oral exam, and passing those two big hurdles are the main steps to getting in. So there's also subspecialties within the Foreign Service of security officers, budget officers, human resources, support specialists of all types. So there's a number of, and there are slightly different career entry points for each of those specialties as well.
What kind of education do you need to become a management officer?
Interestingly enough, there's no, at least the time that I joined, there was no minimum educational requirement to apply to the State Department Foreign Service. You had to be able to pass the exams, both written and oral. But if you could pass the exam, there was no advantage or requirement to have a college degree in any specific subject or a master's or any specific education. But for a management officer, I think you have to be good at things like logistics, like planning, organization, budgets, as well as the people component, because the people component is really what makes all the other subsections work. So you have to be interested and good at basically field operations. So, because that's what you do essentially. You're a field operator as far as keeping an embassy running, keeping the diplomats well equipped, keeping our local staff hired and paid and supported. So all those things are, they all work together.
What is an average day like, or is there an average day?
Well, I would say if you're overseas, and most of the Foreign Service management officers spend most of their career overseas, it is everything from negotiating agreements or property leases. I spent a lot of time in Indonesia negotiating a property lease so that we would have land to build our new embassy on. It's also problem solving. So you would also be responsive to your peers and the ambassador, the deputy chief of mission in their operational needs, whether it's conferences, whether it's meetings on site, whether it's movements of cars from one place to another, whether it's visitors from Washington. All those things happen at an embassy and keep you very busy. There's also, usually management officers supervise a fairly large contingent, anywhere from 10 to 300 or sometimes more staff that help keep the embassy running. So you have to be a very good manager of people, because really the work of your staff and their ability to function efficiently, properly, and with a high performance level is what people will judge you on. So a lot of it is staff management as well.
Are the days long, or is it like a 9 to 5?
Yeah, I would say for most people it's more than 9 to 5, because management officers support a platform overseas that includes people's housing. It includes people's running water in their homes, electricity in people's homes. When there's a burst pipe or some other crisis at your home, people call the management section at the embassy. So it's not something you can easily turn off after hours. Obviously, you want to avoid having late night or weekend work, but sometimes that's inevitable, because when there's a crisis, you can't just tell people, well, wait till Monday at 8 o'clock. When people need something urgently, it is important that the embassy platform is responsive.
Did anything surprise you in your career?
I think what surprised me most was how the State Department was hierarchical, like the military. So that's something I was not expecting from my previous private sector employment. People cared about performance or how much money you brought in for the firm, things like that. But the hierarchy in our State Department structure echoes the military to a surprising degree. And so that, I think, was a big surprise.
How did you get used to the hierarchy?
I think you just learn it and you find your way within it. I think, especially I think for women, it's not necessarily intuitive to be calling people by their rank. So having, all these levels of hierarchy and working through your supervisors is something that you have to learn how to do, and to be respectful, but also be willing and able to work outside the hierarchy when you need to.
What was the greatest lesson that you learned as a management officer?
Oh, God. I think the greatest lesson was gaining the trust of your staff, and especially the local staff. That is something which is so important, because in many countries, the local staff, meaning whether it's, the Mexican staff or the Indonesian staff or the Zimbabwean staff, they're often reluctant to give bad news to the boss. So, being the boss, you don't want to be surprised with some horrible crisis that everyone on the staff knew about, but you didn't know about because no one wanted to tell you. And in certain cultures, like in Indonesia was a good example, that passing bad news to the boss was absolutely culturally frowned upon. So this potentially would leave you as a manager in the dark when there's something about to explode and you would not be informed of it. So learning how to gain the trust of your staff and what the local parameters are and how things work locally, that is a key element to being successful, I think, in foreign cultures. I mean, we all Americans know how the Americans communicate between supervisors and subordinates, but in other countries, there's often critical differences that you need to be attuned to and you need to be able to work successfully through in order to have the trust of your staff so that you can get your job done.
How did you break into the senior foreign service?
It's a competitive process to be, competing for promotions. And I think having a good blend of both Washington and overseas experience is helpful. Having good bosses, and you want to be able to pick strong bosses where you can learn from. I think also putting yourself in challenging environments where you have a big job and the bigger the job, the more difficult the job, the bigger impact you can have, assuming that you're successful. So it's also the risk taking of doing a big job and doing it well. I think, you want to be able to be successful, but you also need to be able to take risks.
And what was one of your biggest challenges?
I think the biggest challenge overall as a management officer is dealing with corruption. Because, we need to be able to operate, whether it's in Mexico, El Salvador, whether it's in Africa or, Southeast Asia. Corruption is a very common element in society. So whether, so people are asking for payments to get a contract signed, payments to move a document along somewhere in the bureaucracy, payments for accessibility to officials. So all of these things, are not the way the U.S. operates. So understanding and knowing where these pitfalls are and how to deal within them is very important. So I think that corruption is something that when you are a management officer, especially, and you're charged with overseas operation and getting something done, but at the same time, we do not pay bribes, we do not cede to corrupt entities. But at the same time, we have work to get done. So how do you navigate that in your country is an enormous challenge.
Is all of this mostly on-the-job training or learn as you go?
There's a very good diplomatic academy at the State Department called the Foreign Service Institute. So they have training there before you go out to an assignment. A lot of your learning, though, is on the job. And, they prepare you as best they can with the language knowledge and the functional knowledge in your specialty. But when it comes right down to it, you're out there in Central America, El Salvador, or wherever you are, and there's not a book or a solution for your particular problem, and you've got a day to figure it out. So there's a lot of on-the-job learning. But I think having a network of colleagues and supervisors is extremely helpful. You cannot be afraid to ask for help. People want to help you. Your peers and your supervisors and your subordinates want you to succeed, believe it or not. No one's, people aren't out there to, aren't waiting for you to fail. They're hoping you succeed. So reaching out when you have a challenge, a problem is very important.
How do you navigate the Foreign Service as a woman of color?
I think it is harder for women in general, and it is definitely harder for women of color to be in sort of as hierarchical a structure as we have at the State Department. It is, I think, as I said earlier, people want you to succeed, but they also want to see you making the effort, trying things out, and maybe failing, maybe, tanking on something, but also how do you handle that wall, that brick wall you've just run into? So, I think women in general are harder on themselves than men are. Women tend to, when they encounter a problem, tend to say, oh, I'm not good enough. Whereas men are like, they just keep going. So I think it is key for women to support each other, for women to find support networks, and they're out there. But it is, I think, there's probably a tendency to be a little more, women tend to judge themselves more harshly, and there's no need for that. So I think it's incumbent on men and women to help their peers succeed, and it's difficult. It's not something that, I don't think there's any easy answer to this, because the way to get contacts is to ask for help, to ask for advice, to ask for meetings and appointments, and oftentimes that is the last thing you want to do as a woman of color, because you don't want to feel like you are stupid. You don't want to feel like you don't know the answer. But at the same time, I think people underestimate how much others want you to succeed in this organization. So, and people don't know that you're stuck or struggling, then they don't reach out to help you.
What is the travel schedule like for a management officer, and are there any travel perks?
Well, usually you are assigned overseas for a 2-year period or a 3-year period, depending on the country. So the State Department will travel you to your new country of assignment. And then depending on the type of job and how big the country is, there may be some in-country travel to various cities or work sites. Often, you usually get 1 trip home, maybe 2 trips home during your assignment. The travel is often, you get assigned to places that are not necessarily tourism spots. So you get to do quite a lot of off the beaten path travel, both inside the country of assignment as well as getting there and in the region. So I think that's actually, the travel is a big perk, because when we were in Southeast Asia in Jakarta, travel to Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia was easy, cheap, and just really a lot of fun. So I think there's travel opportunities when you're assigned to your country that you would, to go to places that you would never otherwise get to see.
What attributes make a great diplomat?
I think you have to have a good sense of adventure. You have to be willing to go to places that you might not be able to find on a globe. You have to be open to foreign cultures, and you have to be adaptable, flexible, willing to learn all the time, because there is no set amount of things you have to know. There's constantly new things to learn. You're constantly moving. And that is one of the difficult parts, I think, for families, is the constant reassignment and relocation in the State Department. That is definitely a challenge for spousal employment. So it is an issue. But I think as long as you are interested and open to foreign cultures, and you're smart and can work fast, a good writer, writing is very highly valued in the State Department, and being able to write clearly and concisely is really important.
You mentioned family. How does this career impact family life?
It is tough. It is very difficult, especially, I think the biggest difficulty is spousal employment. So because of the frequency of moves, it's very difficult for the Foreign Service officer's spouse to have employment continuity in any one place. So if your spouse has a mobile career, then that's that's fantastic. If they're a writer or can easily pick up and move and do and work from foreign countries, that is a huge advantage. But oftentimes that's not possible. And oftentimes people's spouses, both male and women spouses, have a very difficult time finding employment in 2 or 3 year chunks in a foreign country. So the spousal employment piece is probably the most difficult part as far as family adaptation to a career in the Foreign Service. If you're single, then the world's open to you. The other challenge, though, is also children. So, being a Foreign Service officer involves moving your kids around with you every couple of years. And that can be hard on them. It can be a very enriching experience, but it's also can be hard on kids. It's a lot of disruption, change of friendships, change of schools.
As a tandem spouse and as a mother, how did you deal with these changes and challenges?
I think when the kids, we planned out our career so that when the kids entered high school and middle school, that they would be a little more grounded in the U.S., that they had a place in the U.S. that was home. So we did a lot of tours back and forth between the U.S. and overseas, U.S. and overseas. And also, I think the high school years were very important to us, that we were assigned to a country that had a very strong high school. So academics were probably, high school academics were the single most important factor in our bidding and our selection of assignments when our daughters were juniors and seniors in high school. A lot of people just stay in the U.S. for their whole kids' high school times. We didn't want to do that just because we wanted to be overseas a bit more. So both our daughters did our high school in Peru, and we were assigned to Lima. They were both fluent in Spanish, before we went to Peru from our previous assignments in Colombia and Mexico. So, that was another bonus, that kids spoke Spanish fluently. And so going to a new high school, at least they could already speak the language.
What was your favorite part about being a diplomat, about being a management officer?
That's a tough question. No one has ever asked that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no one's ever asked that. What's my favorite part? I think my favorite part was being able to do something that was really difficult. I've always been drawn to difficult tasks. If something was easy, I wasn't that interested in doing it. I always wanted to do something that was very ambitious, very difficult, and at the same time, that was doable in my opinion. So I think I've had a lot of career satisfaction by doing things that were very difficult. For instance, when we were in Indonesia and trying to purchase land for the embassy to build, I was able to negotiate a conclusion to a property dispute that the embassy had going on for over 50 years.
Wow.
So the embassy had tried over 50 years to get this property dispute, to get a big, 2 big parcels of land into U.S. government ownership, and it had been unsuccessful for 50 years of trying, and I did it.
What was your secret?
Well, one, I had learned Indonesian as part of my job. I had 6 months of study of Indonesian. So being able to do all the negotiating in the local language and being able to read all the documents without a translator was very helpful. But the fact that I could walk in and talk to them without using a translator, and they could call, I think that made a big difference. So plus I could have had a gun to my head because we had to get that property signed, or this $200 million project was going to be stalled if I didn't bring in the ownership rights. So I kind of had a big motivator, a huge project, all waiting for this ownership issue to be settled.
You talked a little bit about languages like Spanish and Indonesian. What is the language training like, and how do you keep with knowing so many different languages at one time?
The language training that they offer at the State Department is a full-time course of language. So most of the Romance languages, Spanish, French, Portuguese, tend to be about an 7 or 8 month course of study full-time. So you are expected to learn language as part of your job during language training. So they are not kidding around. It's not like, university or high school language learning. It's very intense, and you're expected to be able to master that language by the time you finish this course of study. Some languages have longer courses of study. Some are 2-year languages. For instance, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and Arabic are all 2-year languages. And then there are a bunch of languages in the middle that are about a year long. It's widely variable, it's highly variable, but it is also a key part of success in the State Department. It's your ability to learn that language and use it to get things done overseas.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think, so, a very common piece of advice is just go for it, right? Go for it, even though you feel you're not qualified, even though you didn't check all the boxes, you didn't major in the right subject. To just go for it is, I think, the best piece of advice. I remember I was applying for a job on the staff of one of the undersecretaries in the State Department, the undersecretary for management. And I went and I set up an appointment to pitch my candidacy. And I sat down there with the hiring manager. He was Senior Foreign Service, Ambassador Harry Geisel. And he shut me down in about 3 minutes. He said, "You're not the right grade. You're too low graded. We have no openings and you don't have enough experience. Okay, bye." So he kicked me out the door pretty darn quick. And I was very dejected. And I said, well, so much for going for it. That worked out real well. And then about 3 weeks later, I get a phone call from the same person who'd kicked me out of his office offering me a job. The same job that I went in to pitch for. And I said, well, wait a minute, just 3 weeks ago, you told me I was too low a grade, I didn't have enough experience, and you didn't have any jobs. And he said, well, we have a job now. We'll put you in a stretch assignment and we'll teach you what you need to know. He said, I admired that you came in and asked for this job and pitched your best, and we'll take you. So I got that job after being certain that I was humiliated permanently in the eyes of this senior official. And I have to say, go for it is pretty good advice.
That's pretty good. I love that story. When you have difficult moments, how did you overcome them? How did you pick yourself back up?
I think you have to find other pleasures in your life that are outside of work. So you cannot just dwell on your work successes or failures. So when things are difficult at work, I think you need to have other things that bring you pleasure, whether it's baking, reading, gardening, your, sports. When our kids were young, I spent an enormous amount of time with them as a Girl Scout leader. And so I was a troop leader here in Washington. I started a troop in Columbia, because my daughters wanted to be in Girl Scouts and there were no troops. And the district said, well, you can start your own troop. And I said, but we don't have a leader. And they said, you're a mom, you can be the leader. So we did that. And, my daughters got to experience, all the fantastic things that Girl Scouts do in that program. And I think having that as a very important, side activity, whether it's your kids' things or your own pursuits, is very important, so that when you have disappointments in your professional life or stresses, that you can go to those things that give you pleasure and take advantage of that, take that pleasure.
That is so key. That's something that I definitely discovered on my first tour, especially with COVID and everything going on.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself.
Definitely.
Things that make you happy.
Definitely. What would you say to someone who would like to follow in your footsteps?
I would say take the test, but before you take the test, study up as much as you can on sort of what are the elements of the test. I actually did not do that. I went in cold and it worked out, but I think I was just lucky. But I would, prepare as much as, but now in my current, and my whole career, the importance of preparation before you go in is something that is indispensable. I would never go into a meeting, a negotiation, or any other thing without preparing to the maximum possible.
And what are some resources that if somebody would like to join the Foreign Service that they should know about?
I think the State Department has a very comprehensive set of tools and guidance on the website. So the website is www.state.gov, and there's a recruitment tab on there that has a lot of information that is free to access. I think there are also some groups. I'm not sure if it's like a Yahoo group or a Facebook group, but there are groups that also are out there, and there's also a Q&A on the website that has a lot of very useful advice. So that's one easy, very accessible resource that those who are interested in the State Department should definitely look into.
All right, Geri, now we're about to go into our rapid fire rounds.
Oh no!
So I will ask a question, and please say the first word or 3 words that come to mind. Okay? Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Your favorite location that you've been to?
Bali.
Favorite food from overseas?
Ooh. Ceviche in Peru.
Your greatest attribute?
Organization.
What are you currently reading?
I just finished the book called The Other Wes Moore.
Who is your greatest inspiration?
I would say 2. One would be my grandmother, because I think women back then in the early 1900s had a very difficult life. But also an aunt I have by marriage, my husband's aunt, actually. Her name is Elaine Thompson. And we actually just came back this week from a new elementary school here in Virginia, was just named after her, the Elaine Thompson Elementary School. And she spent enormous amount of her life documenting the history of African Americans in Loudoun County, Virginia. So she's really an inspirational person. I think she is very quiet. She was very humble.
What was your first job?
My first job ever, or in the State Department?
First job ever.
First job ever. I worked in a clothing store.
And the last question that I'll ask you is, do you have a favorite artist or a favorite period of art or a favorite place that you'd like to get art?
I would say we're big fans of contemporary art. We have a good collection of art by Latin American artists, by Mexican and Colombian artists. And we also have now a big collection of art by Zimbabwean artists. Zimbabwe has a very enormously talented group of artists that have international renown. And I've been to pretty much all of their studios. And just because we had a lot of lockdown time in Zimbabwe and through my NGO project.
Well, thank you so much, Geri. That ends our interview. I know that the viewers out there watching, they will learn so much about the Foreign Service and what exactly a management officer does. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, travelers. Well, that concludes today's episode. I want to say a big thank you to Miss Geri for sharing your rich experiences of being in the Foreign Service with us today. Thank you so much. Travelers, in the comment section below, be sure to let me know who you would like to hear from next. Also, be sure to check out the free e-course. The link is in the bio. And if this video has provided value, please share with others and be sure to smash the subscribe button if you haven't already. Travelers, it's been such a pleasure as always. And until next time, let's travel with our dreams together. See you later. Bye-bye.